At dinner, my mother-in-law threw a plate at me because I refused to serve her more soup. The sound of porcelain shattering against the hardwood floor cut through the silence like a gunshot. Hot broth splashed across my wrist, and for a second I couldn't tell if the burning came from the heat or from humiliation. Margaret sat at the head of the table, back straight eyes, sharp, the queen of her perfect dining room. "When I say I want something, Claire, I expect it done," she said calmly as if giving an order to a servant, not her daughter-in-law. "Daniel." My husband froze beside her, his fork suspended mid-air. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. I stared at the fragments of the plate at my feet, the soup staining the rug, the broken edges glinting under the chandelier, and realized something inside me had cracked too. The dinner had started politely like every other one. The three of us around that glossy table, the air heavy with rules unspoken, but always enforced. Margaret had corrected my posture, my choice of napkins, even the way I breathed when I served her wine. "You were raised differently," she'd said once with a smile that never reached her eyes. Tonight, I'd told her no for the first time. It wasn't defiance. It was exhaustion. "I think you've had enough, Margaret. The soup's gone cold anyway." Her expression had changed, then something dark flickering beneath the surface like a storm forming behind polite eyes. And then the plate flew. For one suspended second time, fractured. I saw Daniel's jaw tighten, but not move. I heard the hiss of soup hitting my sleeve. I felt every ounce of respect I'd been forced to swallow over the last 8 months rise like bile in my throat. When the crash came, the room seemed to exhale. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked at her, the woman who'd spent months undermining me, correcting me, gaslighting me until I questioned my own memory, and I saw her for what she was: not a matriarch, not a mother figure, but a tyrant with a delicate smile and a wine glass always half full. My hands were trembling, but my voice wasn't when I finally spoke. "You just made your last demand in this house." Margaret blinked, her mouth opening in disbelief, but I'd already turned away. The blood from a small cut on my wrist trailed down my fingers as I walked out of the dining room. Behind me, the chandelier kept humming, pretending nothing had happened. Justice, I thought, begins quietly. 3 months earlier, the house didn't feel like a prison yet. When Daniel first suggested we stay with his mother for a while, it sounded temporary, practical. My lease had ended, his new promotion required long hours downtown, and Margaret's sprawling 2-story home in Seattle had a spare room she called the guest suite. She said it with a smile that felt generous at the time. I should have known better. The first week was fine, almost pleasant. She asked about my job as a legal assistant, complimented my cooking, even called me dear, but beneath the politeness, there was structure. A schedule. Breakfast at 8, dinner at 7 sharp. No shoes on the carpet, no noise after 10. "This is a house of order," she said, like she was reciting scripture. I thought she meant well. I mistook control for care. My work-from-home setup occupied the small study by the window. Margaret began visiting mid-morning, hovering behind me with her coffee cup, reading my emails aloud as if they were hers to review. "Why would your boss write good work if it's just clerical?" she asked one day, not waiting for an answer. The same week, she accidentally rearranged my files, mixing them with Daniel's paperwork. Oh dear, I thought these were old bills. Her tone was sugar. The effect was sabotage. I started keeping a notebook small and discreet. Notes about her remarks, her actions, her patterns. A habit I'd picked up from paralegal training: always document. Daniel laughed when I told him. "You're overreacting, Claire. Mom's just set in her ways." Maybe she was. Or maybe she enjoyed watching me doubt myself. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes, "used too much detergent," or "dinner could use more flavor next time," always signed with a heart. Evenings were the worst. Margaret insisted on family dinners every night, the table always immaculate, her posture regal, her tone dripping authority. If I was late, she'd comment about young people and their clocks. If I didn't compliment her food, she'd say, "Not everyone's taught gratitude." Daniel tried to diffuse the tension with jokes, but silence always won. It was in those quiet stretches between her words that I felt the weight of her judgment most. She never yelled. She didn't need to. Her control was quieter, sharper, like fine glass that could cut without leaving visible wounds. I caught myself apologizing for things I hadn't done, rewriting sentences in my head before speaking them. Each day felt like walking a hallway lined with tripwires. I told myself it was temporary, that Daniel and I would find our own place soon. But weeks turned to months, and Margaret's presence spread into every corner, her scent on the linens, her rules in the air. I stopped thinking of it as her house. It had become her courtroom, and I was standing trial every day without ever knowing the charge. The first real fracture appeared on a Sunday morning when sunlight filtered through lace curtains and the scent of Margaret's roses filled the kitchen. She was humming to herself, her back turned to me as I made coffee. "Daniel tells me you forgot to pay the electric bill last month," she said, lightly stirring sugar into her cup. I froze mid-pour. The bill had been paid early, in fact. I'd shown Daniel the confirmation email myself. "That's not true," I said carefully. "I set it on autopay." Margaret turned her smile perfectly neutral. "Oh, maybe I misheard. You know how men are, they forget things. Still, it's good you're learning." I didn't respond. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. That was her method. Tiny distortions of truth dropped like seeds. Each one grew into tension. By the end of the week, Daniel had asked me twice about that late payment. Gaslighting works best when it's slow. A few days later, she began correcting how I folded towels, how I chopped vegetables, how I addressed her friends on the phone. Every correction came with a tone of disappointed authority. "You're a smart girl, Claire, but common sense can't be taught." The words slid beneath my skin like splinters. I tried to talk to Daniel, but he'd sigh, rub his temples, and say, "She's just old-fashioned. Let it go." The problem was, Margaret didn't want me to let it go. She wanted reaction proof that she could control the temperature of the room with her mood. It escalated one afternoon when I was working in the study. My Zoom call was nearly over when she opened the door without knocking. "You've been in here for hours," she said. "The house feels neglected." Her voice was calm, but her eyes gleamed with accusation. "I'm working," I replied, muting the call. "Work doesn't mean you get to ignore family duties." She gestured toward the living room. "The shelves need dusting. You can't expect everything to run itself." I clenched my jaw. "I'll handle it after I finish this report." "Report?" she repeated as though the word were foreign. Daniel never needed a report to pay the mortgage. That was when I realized she didn't just dislike me. She resented me for existing in his life. I represented independence, a threat to her dominion. She hid it behind politeness, but every word was an attempt to reestablish her control. That night, Daniel came to bed late, smelling of whiskey and stress. "Mom says you've been distant lately," he murmured. "Is something going on?" I stared at him in the dark, feeling the walls closing in. "I'm fine," I whispered. "Just tired." He kissed my forehead and turned away. His trust was drifting not to another woman, but to his mother's narrative. From then on, the house itself seemed to shift. My mug disappeared from the cabinet later, reappearing cracked. My favorite scarf ended up in the trash. "Must have fallen," Margaret would say, feigning surprise. The cameras in my mind clicked with every detail. I wrote everything down. Date, time, comment, a record of erosion. One evening, I overheard her speaking on the phone. "I worry about Daniel," she said softly, as if confiding in someone. "Claire's just not domestic. She's ambitious, the type that leaves." I should have been angry, but all I felt was clarity. Her goal wasn't to make me angry, it was to make me question myself until I became exactly what she accused me of being. That night, I added a final note to my log before closing the notebook. Gaslighting confirmed. Escalation inevitable. The evening Margaret humiliated me in front of her friends marked the moment the quiet cracks became fault lines. She'd invited 6 women from her book club, silver hair pearls, glasses of Chardonnay, and insisted I join them for dinner. I was exhausted after a 10-hour workday, but saying no wasn't an option. "It'll be good for you," Daniel said as he adjusted his tie before leaving for a late meeting. "Mom loves showing you off." That sentence stayed with me like a splinter. The table gleamed under chandelier light, polished to perfection. Margaret sat at the head, laughing easily, performing warmth like a practiced act. "My Claire's made her famous roast," she announced, gesturing toward me. I smiled politely, setting dishes down, but her tone wasn't pride, it was possession. As the evening went on, her compliments turned to commentary. Claire's learning her way around a kitchen. Poor dear, didn't even know how to make stock when she moved in. The women laughed polite, but complicit. One of them said, "Oh, bless her heart." In Southern vocabulary, that phrase is an execution masked as sympathy. I felt the heat rise under my collar, but I smiled. "Learning from the best," I said. Margaret's eyebrow arched slightly, warning me to know my place. The conversation shifted to marriages. One woman boasted about her daughter's promotion. Another mentioned her son's engagement. Then Margaret leaned forward, folding her napkin precisely. "Daniel's lucky. Most men don't get home-cooked meals every night anymore. I keep telling him modern wives are too busy chasing careers to remember what family means." The room hummed with agreement. "You still have time to learn," she added, her voice soft but cutting. The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about dinner, it was about identity, about control dressed as tradition. I looked at the faces around me, women nodding, sipping wine, validating her cruelty as culture. I thought of my mother who'd raised me alone while working 2 jobs and how Margaret would have called her unfeminine. I swallowed the anger rising in my throat and poured more water into her glass, steady-handed calm. "You're right," I said evenly. "Not every woman gets to retire on someone else's success." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. One of the guests choked on her wine. Margaret's smile didn't falter, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Such spirit," she said finally, her tone sweetened with venom. "That confidence will make you a fine lawyer one day if you ever finish school." I was already a licensed legal assistant 1 semester away from the bar exam. She knew that. The dig was deliberate. I nodded slowly. "You're right again. The law rewards precision." Her eyes flickered. She understood the subtext that I'd stopped playing her game. For the rest of the evening, she ignored me completely, directing her laughter at the others, dismissing my existence with practiced elegance. When the guests left, the house fell into silence thick enough to choke on. Margaret stood by the sink, rinsing glasses one by one. "You embarrassed me," she said without looking up. "You humiliated yourself," I replied. She turned, then her face composed, but eyes cold. "This is my home, Claire, my son's home. You're here because I allow it. Don't forget that." I didn't answer. I simply picked up the damp dish towel and folded it neatly beside her. And yet I said quietly, "Every house has rules of evidence." I walked out before she could reply. Behind me, I heard the glass slip from her hand and shatter against the sink. It was the sound of something breaking that would never mend again. It happened on a night thick with rain, the kind that drums on the windows and makes the world feel smaller. Daniel was home early for once, still in his work shirt, scrolling through his phone as I served dinner. Margaret sat opposite me, wrapped in her silk cardigan, her perfume sharp in the air. The soup was her favorite chicken and wild rice, simmered for hours, seasoned exactly as she liked. I'd made it out of habit, not affection. I was tired of trying to please her. She took 1 spoonful, then another, then set the bowl down with a faint clink. "Cold," she said simply. "It's barely warm." I checked the steam rising from her bowl. "It's fine, Margaret. Maybe let it sit a moment. It's still hot." Daniel looked up briefly, sensing the tension. "I'll heat it up," I added quickly, but she waved her hand. "No, I want more. Not this batch. Fresh." She pushed the bowl away, splashing broth across the white linen. "You heard me, Claire. I said more." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried command, the same tone she used with waiters, delivery men, even her own son. Something inside me, brittle from months of bending, finally refused to yield. I set my spoon down, steady, deliberate. "There's plenty left in the pot," I said. "If you want more, you can serve yourself." The words hung in the air like smoke. Daniel froze. Margaret's eyes widened, not in shock, but in recognition, like she'd been waiting for this defiance, rehearsing her outrage for months. She leaned back, her mouth curving into a tight smile. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said quietly. "You're capable of lifting a ladle." The silence that followed was suffocating. The clock ticked behind me, marking seconds I'd never get back. Margaret's face flushed crimson. "You forget where you are," she hissed. "You forget who you're speaking to." Daniel's voice was a whisper. "Claire just—" "No," I said, turning toward him. "Not this time." Margaret rose from her chair so fast it scraped against the floor. The soup bowl trembled under her hand. "In my house you serve with respect. That's how family works." I stood too, matching her height, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Then maybe this isn't a family." Her hand moved before I registered it. The plate flew spinning through the air, catching the chandelier's light for a fraction of a second before shattering against the wall inches from my shoulder. A shard grazed my arm, leaving a thin red line that stung immediately. Daniel shouted "Mom," but she barely heard him. "You ungrateful little girl!" she spat. "You don't belong here." The smell of broth and ceramic dust filled the air. I stared at her, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You're right," I said softly. "I don't." I walked toward the kitchen doorway, my feet crunching on fragments of porcelain. Daniel called my name, but I didn't stop. The moment I crossed into the hallway, something in me shifted, a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. For months, I'd been drowning in her control, her gaslighting, her endless reminders that I was lesser. But standing there, blood trickling down my arm, I realized what she'd just given me proof. Physical evidence. I turned back once. Margaret stood trembling, her hand still half raised, her expression caught between rage and fear. Daniel was beside her, wide-eyed, his mouth open but empty of words. "You just made your last demand in this house," I said, my voice calm, detached, legal. The words didn't sound like mine. They sounded like they belonged to a prosecutor delivering a verdict. I went upstairs, locked the bathroom door, and ran cold water over the cut. The pain was nothing compared to the certainty settling in my chest. Margaret thought she'd broken me. What she'd actually done was sign her own sentence. Downstairs, the sound of rain swallowed her voice completely. The bathroom light flickered when I turned it on, a soft buzz filling the silence. My reflection stared back at me through fogged glass, pale and trembling but unbroken. A line of blood traced down my arm, thin but sharp like punctuation on a statement I hadn't planned to make. The mirror didn't just show my face. It showed 8 months of submission, of swallowed words, of quiet endurance, mistaken for obedience. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who'd moved into this house, smiling, hopeful, wanting to belong. She looked older now, not in years, but in clarity. I rinsed the cut under cold water. The sting made me wince, but it also woke something dormant, a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. On the counter sat Daniel's razor kit, perfectly aligned. Margaret's voice echoed in my head, faint but distinct. "In my house, we follow my rules." I looked at the mirror again. "Not anymore," I whispered. I opened the medicine cabinet and found a box of adhesive strips sealed one over the wound with methodical care. My hands stopped shaking. Then I reached for my phone, opened the Notes app, and titled a new entry "Incident Log." I wrote down everything time, place, injury, witnesses, quotes. The years working under lawyers had taught me the value of documentation. Emotion fades. Facts don't. When I finished, I snapped photos of the cut under the harsh bathroom light. It wasn't deep, but it was visible, undeniable. I scrolled through the pictures, steadying my breathing. Each image felt less like pain and more like evidence. I returned to the dining room 15 minutes later. The air still carried the smell of soup and broken ceramic. Margaret was gone, probably upstairs composing her version of the story. Daniel sat at the table, head in his hands. "She didn't mean it," he said quietly, voice trembling. I looked at him for a long moment. She threw at Daniel. "That's intent." He flinched but said nothing. "You think she's losing control?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Because I think she's never had more of it." I didn't wait for him to respond. I went to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and photographed the mess, the shards of porcelain, the splattered broth, the overturned chair. Then I gathered the pieces carefully into a paper bag, folding the top shut like sealing a crime scene sample. I labeled it with a marker. Dinner, 9:47 p.m. Upstairs, the floor creaked as Margaret moved around, humming faintly like nothing had happened. The calm after the storm. That was her favorite part. I stood alone in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I felt neither anger nor fear, just an eerie calm, the kind that comes before a verdict. My reflection in the window looked back at me faint and steady. "You wanted a case," I murmured. "Now you have one." The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds like thin blades. The house smelled of bleach and lavender, the scent Margaret used whenever she wanted to erase evidence of chaos. The dining room table was spotless, the rug replaced. Even the air felt sterilized, like the night before had been scrubbed from memory. But memories don't vanish, they archive themselves. I poured coffee logged into my work email and opened my notes from last night. Incident, physical assault, verbal escalation, third-party witness. Daniel. I reread it twice, editing for precision. Language mattered. At 9 a.m., I called Lisa Chang, my closest friend and colleague from law school, someone who'd handled enough domestic cases to recognize danger long before most. She answered on the second ring. "Claire." "You sound like you've been up all night." "Margaret threw a plate at me," I said plainly. "It hit the wall. Cut my arm." Lisa didn't gasp. She didn't need to. "Do you have photos?" "Yes." "Keep them backed up. Tell me everything slowly." Her voice was calm, the same tone I'd used with victims who weren't ready to call themselves victims. I told her about the months of manipulation, the surveillance disguised as care, the control that had seeped into every breath I took. When I finished, there was silence on the line, then her measured response. "You need to start a formal record, not with her, with law enforcement, even if it's just a report for documentation." That afternoon, I stopped by the precinct under the pretense of meeting a friend nearby. I walked in with my cardigan buttoned to hide the bandage and my phone clutched like a shield. The officer at the desk was polite but indifferent until I mentioned domestic incident. Then his eyes sharpened. He handed me a clipboard. "You can file a preliminary statement. If you choose not to press charges now, it'll still be on record." I filled out every line carefully, sticking to fact, date, time, object used, witnesses. The officer skimmed it, nodded, and stapled my photos to the report. "We'll log this under disturbance and assault," he said. "Do you feel safe returning home?" I smiled faintly. "For now." That night, Daniel came home late. He looked exhausted, guilt shadowing his eyes. "Mom said you two had another disagreement." "That's one way to put it." I slid my sleeve up, revealing the faint line still healing. His face drained of color. "Jesus, Claire, why didn't you tell me it was this bad? Because every time I do, you defend her." He sat down, rubbed his temples. "I'll talk to her." "Don't." My voice was even deliberate. "You'll only warn her." I spent the rest of the evening installing 2 small cameras, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway, discrete, motion-triggered, connected to cloud storage. Margaret loved performance. Now she'd have an audience. At 11 p.m., I drafted an email to Lisa, "All steps complete, report filed, camera set, record in progress." She replied within minutes. "Good. Don't provoke her. Let her expose herself." I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Upstairs, Margaret's footsteps moved slowly down the hall, pausing outside our bedroom door before retreating. I didn't move. I just listened, memorizing the rhythm, the weight, the intention in each step. Every abuser has a pattern. Every pattern leaves a trail. And by the time she realized what I was doing, it would already be too late. It took less than a week for the house to become a pressure chamber. Margaret's moods shifted without warning, too quiet in the mornings, too loud at night. She'd hum while wiping already clean counters, her eyes flicking toward me like a challenge. I didn't react. I worked, cooked, and stayed polite. She mistook restraint for surrender. The cameras saw everything. On Thursday evening, she began drinking earlier than usual. 2 glasses of white wine before dinner, 1 more, while she arranged the silverware. Daniel was late from work, and I was setting the table when she started muttering under her breath. "You think you're smarter than everyone else." I pretended not to hear. "Just because you went to law school, you think that makes you better." Her tone sharpened. "You think I don't know you're trying to turn my son against me." I stayed still. steadying my breathing, letting her voice fill the silence. The camera above the kitchen doorway blinked once recording. "Margaret, maybe we should sit down." "Don't patronize me," she snapped, slamming the drawer. "You're a guest in my home. You'll remember that." She grabbed my wrist suddenly hard enough to make the healing cut sting. "You don't belong here, do you understand? You're poison." I met her eyes, calm, unflinching. "Let go." For a moment, neither of us moved. Her grip tightened, then released abruptly. I watched her chest rise and fall, her breathing uneven. "Dinner's over," I said quietly. I turned and walked toward the hallway. That's when the first crash came, the sound of a glass hitting the floor, followed by the thud of a chair tipping. I didn't turn around. "Run, little lawyer," she hissed behind me. At that exact moment, headlights swept across the living room window. A car door slammed. Daniel's voice echoed through the entryway. "What's going on?" I stood near the staircase, heartbeat steady, while Margaret stood in the wreckage of her own anger. She pointed at me, face flushed. "She's provoking me, Daniel. She's trying to make me look crazy." Daniel looked from her to me. "Mom, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. She's recording me." The words hung heavy electric. My stomach clenched, but my expression didn't change. She'd guessed, but guessing wasn't proof. "Recording you?" Daniel asked slowly. "Why would she?" A knock interrupted him. "Sharp official." "3 times." Margaret froze. Daniel frowned, walked to the door and opened it to reveal 2 uniformed officers, rain glistening on their shoulders. "Good evening," the taller one said. "We received a call about a disturbance at this address. Neighbors reported shouting and possible property damage." Margaret's color drained. "That's ridiculous," she said quickly. "It's a misunderstanding." The officer's gaze drifted past her to the broken glass, the tipped chair, the redness around my wrist. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I nodded once, keeping my tone even. "I'm fine now." "Would you like to make a statement?" the other officer asked. Margaret's head snapped toward me, disbelief in her eyes. She wasn't used to witnesses who mattered. "She doesn't need to." "Yes," I interrupted softly. "I would." The officers stepped inside. One of them took notes as I described the sequence of events, each detail measured, and calm, my voice never shaking. When I finished, he asked if there had been prior incidents. "A few," I said, meeting his eyes. "Documented." Margaret sputtered. "This is absurd." "She's lying." The officer's tone stayed neutral. "We'll include your statement as well, ma'am." Daniel stood frozen in the corner, the weight of everything finally dawning on him. The officer handed me a card with a report number. "If anything else happens, call us directly." They left minutes later, their cruiser lights washing the front yard in blue and red. Margaret turned to me, pale and trembling. "You think you've won?" "No," I said quietly, slipping the officer's card into my pocket. "I think the law just started watching." 2 days later, the mask began to crack. Margaret stopped pretending to be civil. She moved through the house like a storm wrapped in silk, muttering under her breath, calling me guest parasite faker. Daniel avoided being home, working later and later, leaving me alone with her, the perfect conditions for escalation. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd already moved beyond fear. I was building a record. That Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of her voice downstairs. She was on the phone, her tone sharp and performative. "I don't know how much more I can take," she said loudly. "She's unstable, keeps accusing me of things." Daniel's worried. Pause. Then, "No, I'm safe. For now." Her performance was deliberate, meant to bait me into an outburst. I didn't take it. I just pressed record. By noon, I had 6 audio clips, her shouting, her banging drawers, her calling me names, whispering threats that sounded almost tender. "I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." Each word became digital proof. I backed up every file to cloud storage and sent a copy to Lisa. Her reply came fast. "Don't confront her. Let the pattern speak for itself." This is building beautifully. Beautifully. A strange word for something so ugly. But in a legal sense, she was right. Patterns build cases, not emotions. That evening, Daniel finally came home. He dropped his keys on the counter and sighed. Exhaustion etched into every movement. "Mom told me you called the police," he said. She told you half the truth, I replied. You weren't here, Daniel. You didn't see what happened. She's terrified, he said. She thinks you're out to destroy her. I'm out to survive her, I corrected. There's a difference. He rubbed his face. I just need this to stop. Then tell her to stop. My voice stayed calm, but I could see the words hit him like stones. He left the kitchen without answering. I heard his footsteps climb the stairs, heard Margaret's door open, heard their muffled voices. My phone sat on the table beside me, quietly recording. 10 minutes later, she screamed. How dare you take her side after everything I've done for you? Then, something slammed wood against wall, a picture frame maybe. She's turning you against your own mother. Daniel's voice rose, but it was shaky. Stop it, Mom! Another crash? You think I don't see it, she shouted. She's poisoning this family. Then the sound that made my stomach drop a slap. Sharp, undeniable, caught perfectly by the microphone. Silence followed, then her sobbing, his retreating footsteps, the door slamming shut. I stood frozen, phone clutched in my hand, every instinct screaming to intervene, but I didn't. I didn't need to. I had proof. Later, Daniel appeared in the doorway of our bedroom, his cheek-red eyes glassy. She hit me, he said as if confessing a crime. I told her to stop talking about you and she... His voice broke. I guided him to sit on the bed. For once, I didn't say I was sorry. I just handed him a glass of water and whispered, Now do you see? He nodded slowly, shame creeping across his face. I'll stay with a friend tonight, he said finally. She needs space. So do I. After he left, I uploaded the recording, labeled it Exhibit B Audio, Saturday Incident Verbal plus Physical Assault. I attached a summary to Lisa's email, escalation complete, both targets documented. She replied minutes later. It's time. File the restraining order Monday morning. I'll prepare your witness statement. I set the phone down and exhaled. Upstairs, I heard Margaret's door open, then close again, softer this time. The sound no longer scared me. She didn't realize she'd just crossed from power to evidence, and there's no coming back from that. Monday morning smelled of rain and coffee, a combination that always made me think of renewal. I woke before dawn, dressed deliberately. Navy blouse, gray slacks, no jewelry, and gathered my file folder, printed photographs, police report number. Screenshots of messages, timestamps from the video footage, and the audio recordings transcribed word for word. Every piece of her cruelty now had a paper trail. The courthouse was quiet when I arrived at 8:30. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I took a number and sat on a wooden bench waiting. A man in a janitor's uniform mopped the floor near the clerk's desk. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and bureaucracy, cold, clean, procedural. Perfect. When my number was called, I approached the window, sliding my documents through the opening. I'd like to file for a restraining order against my mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, I said clearly. The clerk, a woman with silver glasses and kind eyes, nodded. Do you have evidence of threat or harm? I met her gaze. Plenty. She skimmed my statement silently for a full minute before speaking. You've been thorough. The judge will appreciate that. We'll get you on the docket for this afternoon. She stamped my papers and handed me a yellow copy. Keep this with you at all times. If she contacts you, call us immediately. I walked out of the courthouse into a soft drizzle, feeling something I hadn't felt in months' agency. The rain slicked the sidewalks, the city muted but alive. I stopped at a cafe across the street, ordered black coffee, and called Lisa. Filed, I said. Court hearing at 2. Good, she replied. Stay calm, stay factual. She'll hang herself with her own words. By the time I returned home, Daniel's car was already in the driveway. Through the front window, I saw him sitting at the dining table, head in his hands, Margaret pacing nearby like a restless predator. Her voice filtered through the glass, sharp, brittle, furious. I hesitated, then entered quietly. She spun the moment the door closed. You went to the police again, didn't you? Her eyes glittered with rage. Daniel looked up, confusion etched deep. Mom, what are you talking about? She's trying to ruin us, Margaret hissed, pointing at me. First the cops, now the courts. She's filing something, I can feel it. I set my purse on the counter. You don't have to feel it, I said evenly. It's a matter of record. Daniel stood face pale. Claire, what did you do? I protected myself, I said. And you? Margaret laughed a hollow, brittle sound. You think a piece of paper will protect you from me? No, I said quietly. The law will. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against the walls. She took a step forward, her voice trembling between fury and disbelief. You ungrateful, conniving little girl! After everything I've done, you threw a plate at me, I interrupted, my tone, still measured. You grabbed me, you hit your own son, and now there's evidence. So yes, after everything you've done. Daniel looked between us like a man watching two trains collide. Claire, please, he said, voice cracking. Don't do this. It's already done, I replied. The hearing's at 2. Margaret went pale. You wouldn't. I would. I did. She lunged forward, but Daniel caught her arm before she could reach me. Stop, Mom! Please. Her voice dropped to a whisper, venomous and raw. You'll regret this. I stepped back toward the door. Maybe I said, but I'll regret staying far more. At exactly 2 o'clock, I stood before Judge Morales in courtroom 4B. She was calm, middle-aged, the kind of woman who'd seen every flavor of domestic conflict. I presented my evidence one piece at a time: photos, recordings, police report, witness statement. Each document landed like a quiet gavel strike. When it was over, she nodded once. Temporary protective order granted, she said, signing her name with a decisive stroke. Effective immediately. Ms. Whitmore must vacate your shared residence by midnight and maintain a distance of no less than 100 yards. I thanked her, took my copy, and stepped into the hallway where everything felt sharper, cleaner. Justice, I realized, doesn't shout. It signs paperwork. It stamps dates. It delivers peace in triplicate. The sheriff's deputy arrived just after sunset. The sky was the color of bruised violets, that strange quiet before the dark fully settles. I stood by the window watching his patrol car roll into the driveway, red and blue lights briefly painting the white siding of the house. Margaret was in the living room pacing like a caged animal. Daniel stood near the fireplace, eyes hollow. The deputy stepped inside, polite but firm. Mrs. Whitmore. His voice carried the weight of procedure. Margaret froze mid-step. Yes. You've been served with a temporary restraining order effective immediately. You are required to vacate the premises tonight. Her face went slack for a moment, then flushed scarlet. This is absurd. This is my son's home. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. The deputy continued. The order allows you to collect personal items only. Anything beyond that must be arranged through legal counsel. He handed her a packet of documents, the official copy of what I'd filed that morning. The seal gleamed under the light. Margaret stared at the papers as if they might catch fire. You did this, she whispered, looking at me. Her voice trembled not from fear, but disbelief, the first crack in her certainty that she was untouchable. Yes, I said simply. I did. Daniel, she pleaded, turning to her son. Say something. Stop this. He looked at her, then at me, and for the first time in months, he didn't rush to her defense. His voice was low, tired. Mom, I think it's time you left. The words broke her composure. You're siding with her. After everything I've done for you. You hit me, he said quietly. I can't unhear that. Margaret stumbled back as if struck. That recording she made you say that? No, he said. You did. The deputy cleared his throat. Ma'am, I'll give you 15 minutes to pack essentials. She moved mechanically, gathering her jewelry box, a few folded blouses, her handbag. I watched from the hallway, not with satisfaction, but with something quieter relief edged with sorrow. She'd wanted to destroy me with control. Instead, she'd destroyed herself with pride. When she passed me on the way out, she stopped. Her perfume was still sharp, her voice still dangerous. You think this is over? You humiliated me. I met her gaze, calm and steady. No, I said. You did that yourself. The deputy escorted her to the car. The engine started, then faded down the street until only silence remained. For the first time in months, the house exhaled. Daniel sank into a chair, rubbing his face. I don't even know who we are anymore. Maybe now, I said softly, we get to find out. He nodded, eyes unfocused, lost between guilt and clarity. I need to stay somewhere else tonight. I can't. I understand, I said. Take your time. After he left, I walked through the rooms Margaret had occupied like inspecting an old crime scene. Her tea set still sat on the counter, one cup half cleaned, one untouched. The faint outline of her slippers remained on the living room rug. I picked up the last of her perfume bottles from the vanity and placed them in a box marked Evidence, Closure. Upstairs, I opened the window and let the desert air in. The scent of dust and rain filled the room. Freedom doesn't arrive with music or applause. It comes as stillness as breath. I sat at my desk and began to write a letter to myself this time. Today, the silence feels earned. The house feels like mine again, not because I won, but because I stopped being afraid to lose. Before bed, I checked my phone. A message from Lisa waited. Heard from the clerk. The order's airtight. She won't come back. I typed my reply slowly. Justice isn't loud. It's precise. Outside, thunder rolled over the horizon, distant and low. For the first time in a long while, I slept without waking. Morning came soft and golden. The house, once heavy with tension, now felt impossibly light. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the stairs, even the birds outside sounded different, like they belonged to a new rhythm. I brewed coffee in silence, no footsteps overhead, no cutting remarks waiting behind a smile. Just the quiet that follows a long-deserved verdict. I walked through the dining room, my eyes catching the faint mark on the wall where the plate had shattered weeks ago. The paint still bore a thin crack, a scar of violence turned into memory. I touched it lightly, not with anger, but gratitude. Proof that I'd survived. By noon, Daniel called. His voice was soft, tentative. She's staying with my aunt for now. She's angry, but calmer. I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. You don't owe her forgiveness, I said gently. You just owe yourself peace. He was silent for a moment, then, I'm sorry for not believing you sooner. You believed when you were ready, I replied. That's enough. Later that week, I met Lisa downtown at a small cafe near the courthouse. She brought her laptop already drafting the follow-up paperwork for the permanent restraining order. Once this is finalized, she said you'll never have to see her again unless you choose to. I smiled faintly. I won't. She closed the laptop and leaned back. You know, she said most people would have fought back with shouting or revenge. You fought with documentation. That's rare. Anger burns fast, I said, stirring my coffee. Evidence lasts. Lisa chuckled softly. You should teach that. The truth was, I didn't feel vengeful. Margaret's downfall wasn't my victory, it was her reflection. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of cruelty had been preserved in her own voice, her own handwriting, her own choices. I'd simply built the mirror and handed it to the court. She'd done the rest. 2 months later, the hearing for the permanent order took less than 10 minutes. The judge reviewed the file photos, recordings, police reports, Daniel's written statement, and signed without hesitation. Protection order granted for 5 years, she said. The sound of her pen on paper felt like the closing of a door that would never reopen. I left the courthouse and walked out into sunlight so bright it made my eyes water. Across the street, I bought a single white lily from a flower vendor. Margaret had once told me lilies meant forgiveness. I placed it in a fountain near the courthouse steps and whispered, "Not for you, for me." Then I turned and walked away. Life after her absence unfolded quietly. Daniel and I began marriage counseling not to fix what was broken, but to understand what had survived. There were still nights when he woke sweating guilt clinging to his skin, but each time he looked at me, I could see he was learning to unlearn her voice. Healing isn't linear. It loops and stumbles, but it moves. I started volunteering with a local legal clinic helping women file protective orders. I saw my own story reflected in their trembling hands, their uncertain smiles. Each time I told them, the law doesn't erase what happened. It gives you proof that it mattered. Months later, I repainted the dining room. The color was soft blue, the same shade as the morning sky after a storm. Daniel helped roll the paint across the wall where the crack had been. We didn't speak much, just moved together in rhythm, covering the last trace of that night. When we finished, I stepped back and looked at the wall. Smooth, new, whole. That evening, as we ate dinner at the same table, I realized I wasn't reliving the past anymore. I was reclaiming it. Every scar had turned into structure, every silence into strength. The story didn't end with rage or punishment. It ended with space earned, protected, and entirely my own. I lifted my glass, looked at Daniel across the soft blue walls, and said the only thing that felt true: justice served. He nodded once, eyes wet but steady, and peace kept. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of rain again, only this time it didn't smell like warning. It smelled like home,